Hi, my name is Florence French Fagan, and I am the Florida State Organizer with Bread for the World. I'm here today to tell you a little bit about the racial wealth gap learning simulation. Before I proceed, I want to emphasize that this is not a game. This is a simulation that has impacted millions of people's lives. Bread for the World is an organization that was established 45 years ago. Our sole mission is to end hunger and poverty, both domestically and internationally. But we are not talking about ending hunger through programs and services. While programs and services are very important, what we're talking about are policy changes and getting to the root cause of hunger and poverty. In this simulation, you will see some of the policies that have contributed to hunger and policy and created what we now call systemic racism. We want to talk about the difference between equality and equity. Equality is where everyone has a bicycle in this depiction, but not everyone can ride the bicycle comfortably or ride it at all. Equity is taking those same bicycles and making changes to them so that everyone is comfortable and everyone can ride the bicycle. So when we're thinking about equity in our programs and policies, we want to ask ourselves, what do we need to do? What changes do we need to make so that there are equitable outcomes for everyone? There are 4 forms of racism that we discuss. The 2 we touch on briefly. Internalized racism is how we are socialized. We're raised in a society where humans are ranked by race, and it's sort of beyond our control. Internalized racism is how we process that internally, unconscious bias, how we treat one another, especially people of color. Institutional and structural racism are really one and the same. It is the foundation of our systems, our education system, our banking system, our incarceration system. These systems that are based on a history that is very, very inequitable. We will show a 5-minute video on historical trauma. For the purpose of this video, I will not show it, but during our presentation, we do show this video on historical trauma because typically when we talk about African-American history, we talk about it in terms of slavery rather than enslavement and the trauma that human beings went through during this period of time of history. Before COVID-19, more than 35.2 million people in the United States were facing hunger, and over 34 million people were living below the federal poverty line. Half of American households were just 1 paycheck away from experiencing poverty. At the height of COVID-19, more than 40% of people were living below the federal poverty line. More than 40% of people were facing hunger, and hunger increased by 3 times because of COVID-19. Over 17% of people in the United States were living below the federal poverty line, and likely more than half of American households, or 85%, became poor as a result of losing a job. People of color are twice as likely to experience hunger, live below the poverty line, and be 1 paycheck away from becoming poor. During the pandemic, Black, Latino, and Indigenous households have become 3 times as likely to experience all 3 of these realities compared to their white counterparts. When we do the simulation, we like to give region-specific information so that participants understand that while they are looking at federal policies, there is a regional component to each of these policies. So in this example here, we're going to look at Seminole County. In 2019, a study found that 1 in 7 people in Central Florida struggled with hunger. And according to a study, there are 52,000 people in Seminole County that suffer from food insecurity. and that is because of the racial wealth and income divide. When you think about wealth, you think about the ability to buy a home or to purchase a car or to take a vacation or to insulate yourself from a natural disaster or a pandemic. If you do not have the ability to accumulate wealth from generation to generation through land, through financial investment, then you're more likely to experience hunger and poverty. Again, the reason that we developed this simulation is to give people a better understanding of why racial equity is so important and why we need to address it. We want you to become more comfortable having this conversation in whatever organization you're in, whether it's your employment or your church or community, nonprofit organization. Most importantly, we hope that you take what you learn and you're able to see things differently, whether it's personally or in your work, that you see things through a racial equity lens. Now, if we were doing this in person, we would be sitting at tables of between 4 and 8 people, and we would have our packet in front of us. We would open up our packet and we would have our race cards, our money cards, our land cards, and our lost opportunity cards. Each individual would choose whether they want to be a Black participant or a white participant. When we do this virtually, we will assign your role based on what letter of the alphabet your first name starts with. When we do this virtually, we usually have one person who will help us read the policies and another person who will help us read the action card. At the end of each policy, you're going to take an action based on whether you chose to be a white participant or a Black participant. There is an action card sheet that we can provide, so you can keep a tally, or you can just use a plain piece of paper. We will also keep a tally on the screen for you. So we will begin with policy number 1, land seizures 1865 to present day. After the Civil War, only 30,000 African Americans owned small plots of land compared to 4 million who did not, because an 1865 federal law rescinded the government's promise of 40 acres of land for former slaves. These 4 million Blacks largely resorted to renting the farmland of their previous master in exchange for a share of their crop. This system of sharecropping tied farmers to their former master because they were legally obligated to buy all farming materials, usually at higher prices, and sell their farming crops solely to their former masters, usually at lower prices. Black participants will add 1 land card and 1 money card to represent the less than 1% of African Americans who are able to own land and not face debt after slavery. Unfortunately, Black participants should also add 4 lost opportunity cards for the 4 million African Americans who had to sharecrop and were denied the initial promise of land ownership, buying farm supplies from the landowner at higher prices only to sell their crops back at lower prices, resulted in African Americans facing higher levels of debt and higher rates of hunger. And this is the action. Black participants took 1 money card and 1 land card, and they also had to take 4 lost opportunity cards. Policy number 2, Andrew Johnson's land policies and sharecropping, 1865 to 1880. From 1865 on, Blacks could have their land seized to pay sharecropping debts, or simply because white landowners declared that Black farmers or businesses were in debt. Blacks could not fight these charges because they were legally prohibited from suing whites in court. In addition, from 1949 to 1970, 1 million people lost their land to abuses of the power of eminent domain, which allows local governments to seize private property. About 70% of these families were African American. White participants will add 1 land card and 2 money cards for having the legal ability to seize the land of Black farmers and business owners increasing your income and reducing your vulnerability to hunger. Black participants, subtract a land card for the land lost under land seizures. Also subtract a money card for the tens of millions of dollars lost from no longer having land to help earn an income and grow food to eat. So after policy number 2, we see that Black participants have lost the money card and the land card that they earned after policy number 1, and white participants have gained 1 land card and 2 money cards. So the simulation continues this way from policy 1 to policy 13. We will cover the National Housing Acts, part 1 and 2, where we talk about redlining and eminent domain. We continue on with policy number 5, which covers the Social Security Act in 1935, which would not be amended for 30 years. Followed by policy number 6, the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938, which is when the first minimum wage was set. This is followed by policy number 7, the GI Bill of 1944. This is where the middle class was built and where we could have had an opportunity to really level the playing field for everybody so that everyone would have had access to the middle class, but Black people were completely excluded. This is followed by policy number 7 with separate but equal, 1954 to present day. Schools are more segregated than they ever have been. And depending on the region that you are in, we will give you that region specific information. Specifically for Florida, if you are a white student, you are more likely to attend a school that is not only all white, but is in a middle class school. And if you are a Black student, you're more likely to attend a school that is predominantly Black, where most of the children come from lower to living below the federal poverty level. This is followed with policy number 9, subprime lending from the 1970s to present day. And then we touch on policy number 10, which is the war on drugs, which started in 1971 to present day. In Florida, you are 4 times as likely to be arrested for marijuana possession if you are Black than if you are white. Then we follow with policy number 11, the life after incarceration consequences of the war on drugs to present day. So we talk about collateral consequences like not being able to qualify for SNAP or being able to vote and things like that. And then that is followed with policy number 12, employment discrimination present day. We talk about the discrepancy in the ability to earn income. And then we close with policy number 13, the voting restrictions, 1890 to present day. And as we know, currently there are 47 states that are trying to implement new voting restriction laws. This is a timeline showing an overview of the policies that we cover from 1865 to today. And then we review how many cards everyone is left with at the end of the simulation. Black participants will have 14 lost opportunity cards, 2 land cards, and only 1 participant would have a money card. White participants would have 13 money cards, 7 land cards, and 1 lost opportunity card. So you can see that Black participants and white participants lose opportunity and gain wealth almost at the same rate. In real-time dollars, looking at data from 2013, for every 141,000 a white household has, a Black household would have 11,000, making the ratio 13 to 1. Now, when you're looking at a family or household living near or below the federal poverty line, the ratio is even wider. For every $18,000 a white household has, a Black household has 0, making the ratio 18 to 0. We do have 2 breakouts during the simulation. We will have one at policy number 7, which is the midway point for the simulation. It's about a 5-minute breakout, and we just encourage people to talk about how they're feeling. in the role that they've taken on in the simulation? And are they learning anything that they didn't know thus far? At the end of policy number 13, we will have a longer breakout for about 15 to 20 minutes. And these are some guided questions. Typically, people don't get to all of the questions. They may answer one or two. They may talk about something totally different, depending on the synergy of the group that they're in, because this is a very emotional experience, especially when people are doing this for the first time. At the end of the simulation, at the end of the discussion, we suggest some next steps that people can take. We encourage them to stay in touch with me, to get involved, to become advocates with Bread for the World, and to also share the simulation with their larger community. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen and to watch this video today. I look forward to hearing from you. Take care. Bye-bye.